Welcome everyone, and thanks for joining us for today's episode of Canal Days. As always, I am your host, Carrie, along with my co-host, founder of Historical Tours of Greater Holyoke, Robert Quinlan. Our Canal Days series goes into the vast collection of historical sites throughout Massachusetts, with Robert's expertise of the local history as our personal guide. Each episode, we uncover history throughout local communities, highlighting historic landmarks and uncovering their seminal significance. So today's special episode of Canal Days, we will be discussing the Ferries of Holyoke in Holyoke, Massachusetts. So first, can you brief us on the northernmost ferry, the Rock Ferry?
That was a ferry that went between the Hockanum Cliffs of South Hadley over to the very northernmost tip of Holyoke right before it turned into East Hampton, and then 300 yards more into Northampton. It was a very busy one. It's called Hockanum on both sides of the river, but there's the big cliff on the South Hadley side. And that just short of that, a little bit to the south, they'd go very flat very quickly, and that's where the ferry was there, going over to, of course, by then it was the Smith's Ferry part of Northampton. And it even went by other names. So it wasn't quite Holyoke yet, but what would become Holyoke in 1909. By that time, the ferry might have been gone. So this one is, by osmosis, part of the Holyoke discussion. Now, it was named after that cliff itself, and it was heavily used mostly by East Hampton residents and some Northampton residents towards the south. And then, of course, anyone from South Hadley that was in the very northernmost tip of South Hadley, especially northwest tip. And it was very important because it was one of the first, since it was very close to a major place that was Northampton, which was the capital of all the western Massachusetts. Hampshire County used to be 4 counties at one time. So this is a very heavy one, but through the years it got less and less. So we're going to talk about all these ferries: Smith's Ferry, Robinson Ferry, Jones Ferry, and a ferry that I know is there, and we still haven't figured out its name. And we're going to talk about similarities and by contrast and comparison of them all. And we're going to talk about what happened to them, so forth.
And next, acquaint us with the ferry about 2 miles south, the Smith's Ferry.
The Smith's Ferry went between Smith's Ferry neighborhood of Northampton, and then when it changed to Holyoke, it still existed. It existed to 1912, which was into the Holyoke period. It went over to the South Hadley side. Both sides, you can see where the ferry went in, and there's actually a ferry street in South Hadley, and it was a ferry that was started in about 1770 and ended about 1909, so it lasted for over 140 years. That's an incredible record. It had 6 owners during that time, including Linus Smith and one of Joel Day. And one of the Smith family had owned it. In fact, even when he died, Hervey Smith gave it to his son, Emerson, so it stayed in the Smith family for a very long time. And the Smith family took it over and put its main place in Holyoke instead of South Hadley. It started being used heavily by Smith College students, and that's why Smith Ferry neighborhood got its name, because it was a destination, a major destination for a large group of people, and that was college students, and they used it quite heavily. And not only did the Smith Ferry family, the Smith family, the children of Lewis Smith, run it, they also ran a tavern. They also ran a depot for the train station. They also ran a depot for the trolley line. They also ran a boat input for boats that want to go towards this side. They were very close to the South Hadley Navigational Canal's northernmost tip, which had a lot of business in both directions anyways. So they had a lot going for themselves, and they started getting fairly rich off of this.
And Then we have the unique Robinson Ferry. Can you fill us in on that ferry?
Most ferries work by having oxen pull from both sides, so they pull them across the river, and they have oxen on the other side to pull them back with a cable attached. For that reason, you have to be pretty safe and make sure no boats were coming, because you'd have this guided cable across the river. But it worked. So that was most ferries. But the Robinson Ferry worked in a different manner. And that's because it was in the middle of a rapids area. And the way it worked was they had a gigantic swing. It's called a swing ferry, the Robinson Swing Ferry. And it was a big log of wood that was big as the river itself. They would pull that with a guided cable, and that boom, when you released it, would help pull it along with the current itself, all the way from South Hadley, where it was based, into Holyoke. And then to get it back, you had to pull that boom back. So, but again, it worked, and that's what the most important. Probably was made because just pulling by accident against that current was tough, and so they put a little extra propulsion behind it. Pretty cool. So this one was the most unique of all, but there are others.
And familiarize us with the Jones Ferry.
Jones Ferry is the southernmost of the 5 ferries that are between Holyoke to the other side of the river, either South Hadley or Chicopee. This Jones Ferry was to the Chicopee side. It was on the most placid waterway of all. It was an area where the river is fairly wide and very calm and very straight. And so it was an easy one to do. It was based in Holyoke at a position where today you see Holyoke Rows, ROWS. Also La Finca is around that area. And the Jones Ferry was between 2 pretty big places, Holyoke and Chicopee. So it was heavily used to cross goods over and also to cross people.
And stick around and we'll be right back after this quick announcement. Are you fascinated by local history and eager to investigate the obscure treasures off the beaten path throughout the state of Massachusetts? Or maybe just seeking an unforgettable cultural activity for family and friends to enjoy? Look no further than Historical Tours of Greater Holyoke, founded by Robert Camus. With over a decade of experience, Robert offers captivating tours and presentations of historic sites and landmarks throughout the state. Whether you're interested in canals, cemeteries, charming churches, or more, Robert's tours provide a unique and enriching experience for all. And that's not it. You can also schedule private tours tailored to your interests, ensuring a personalized adventure and unforgettable memories. Perfect for families or groups of all sizes, making for an exciting hands-on learning experience that brings history to life. Simply visit hoyokecanaltour.org or email bobcat4214, capital B, @yahoo.com to book your private tour today. So, getting back to our episode on the Ferries of Holyoke, tell us about the ferry that was near the South Hadley Canal.
There's one more ferry. This would be the 3 by position. It'd be the 3rd one along from either the south or the north. It was the middle of the ferry. It was between where the South Hadley Navigational Canal starts to go inland, so it had a position there. And it was also on the Holyoke side, pretty close to where you would have the modern day Jones Point Park, a little bit to the north of that. And it was probably made for the people that lived in homes just inside the west of the South Hadley Navigation Canal as it went in. And maybe that's the reason why it existed. It was probably the least busy of all, and a couple of people that I know have researched it, and they're sure it exists, but haven't found a name. Probably it had a family name associated with it, but it was necessary because the South Hadley Canal, very necessary canal, it's 2.5 miles long, actually cut off a bit of South Hadley, so it was tough to get there. You couldn't put bridges over that portion. And to get supplies into that area, you had to come from the Holyoke side, which, of course, was the Smith's Ferry portion of Northampton back then. So this was a very particular canal. But when I find out more information about it, its name and Jews who ran it, I'll tell you about it.
And clarify for us, what was Day's Landing?
Day's Landing was a place where boats could put in. It was similar somewhat to a ferry situation. That's why I want to include it here. It was run by the Day family of Holyoke. This was a family that sent off every man and boy in the family had gone off to the Revolutionary War. The father, Joel, and then his 5 sons. And 2 of them would die. A young boy who brought provisions to Troy died. Another boy who was 18 years old and private died by a disease. So his family lost 2 people due to the Revolutionary War. And the family, actually, one of the brothers, Joel, ran the Smith's Ferry for a while before the Smith's family took over. And they did a landing here. It was called the Jebediah Day Landing. And what it did, there was actually a navigational channel on the Holyoke side of the Connecticut River that supplemented the South Hadley Navigational Canal. This channel was only a mile long, and it went up very close to where boats went in to the South Hadley Navigational Canal. It started for 2 years on the Chicopee side. It got washed out in a flood, and they made it simple. They made a channel, so they dug up or dredged soil out of the western edge of the Connecticut River along the Holyoke edge, and boats went up through there because they were where the Willamette Rapids at that position. Now, before the southernmost tip of this channel, you had to collect a fee because it was fee-based, and you do that at Jebediah Day's Landing. This is where boats came in. If they wanted to go up the channel, they'd pay. If boats didn't want to go any further, they'd take off goods and bring them inland, and either they're going to people in Holyoke or they'd be shipped from Holyoke area. If you come from the north through the Sahi Canal, and you'd have to go across the river to the other side, you'd enter into this channel for 1 mile, and it'd be there, people to guide you along. But when you got to the end of it, you had to pay another fee. So this Jebediah Day Landing was a fee-based channel point, and it was very important. It was almost like one of the navigational canals on the Connecticut River. And I've pointed out in a presentation that there were 6 along the Connecticut River that allowed for transportation from Long Island Sound up to the very tip, almost the tip of New Hampshire. And this would have been number 7 if it were a real canal, but it was just a channel.
And there were a lot of ferries throughout Holyoke. Can you enlighten us on why they were so central?
Yes, because both South Hadley and Holyoke and Chicopee were very busy places. These were places that were settled very early on in history, before there was a lot of bridges put in. There were none on the Connecticut River, especially around this area. And so you needed to cross the goods across the water. Just like people through all of civilization have used water for most of their transportation needs, and settlements are always near water. And so there was a need for ferries. And there was a lot of commerce between South Hadley, which is actually larger population-wise than Ireland Parish, which became Holyoke. So you had to cross a lot of goods. Springfield was on the eastern side of the Connecticut River, and you want to get goods up to Northampton or into Ireland Parish, you had to use ferries. And people wanted to cross, they had to use ferries. And so this is an extension of water transport. Of course, when bridges came, things would change. And what also made them very useful were these navigational canals on the Connecticut River. Once the goods landed somewhere, you'd have to get them to the other side of the river. It has an area, the Connecticut River Valley really prospered. These ferries became very important.
And clarify for us what happened to the ferries.
What happened was that you started to get bridges crossing the river. For instance, the County Bridge in 1870 was built. It wasn't that good, but it still was there. And that helped people get across the river from South Hadley to Holyoke. The ferry was still needed because that bridge was towards the south of Ireland Parish and south of South Hadley. And then you started having a bridge up where the Calvin Coolidge Bridge was, the predecessor bridge in the 1880s. So that helped people get across. But look at it, the Smith's Ferry lasted since 1912, deep into the ages of bridges. And so when cars became more prevalent, the need for ferries went away. So it wasn't really the bridges per se, it was the cars, because they had greater speeds than horse and buggies or carriages. And those really put them out of business. It wasn't even the trolleys. Trolleys were going up and down South Hadley and Ireland Parish section of Holyoke by the 1880s, and they didn't put them out of business. So what it really was the cars.
And thank you for tuning into our episode on the ferries of Holyoke, Massachusetts, and joining us on our journey through the rich history of the Connecticut River Valley. We hope you enjoyed uncovering some of the hidden overlooked marvels and their fascinating stories that shaped our past and the state of Massachusetts. A special thanks to Robert Camus, founder of Historical Tours of Greater Holyoke, for sharing his passion and expertise with us. Remember, you can find more information about Robert's tours, book private tours, and explore the Canal Days video and podcast series at holyokecanaltour.org. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please like, comment, and share. We'd love to hear your thoughts and suggestions for future episodes.